Cine va câștiga alegerile din Statele Unite? Este întrebarea momentului nu doar pentru americani, ci pentru întreaga lume. Administrația actuală a provocat foarte multe controverse de-a lungul ultimilor 4 ani, dar a rezolvat, e adevărat, în stilul marca Donald Trump și o serie de probleme. Oricare va fi rezultatul alegerilor de marțea viitoare, rămân de rezolvat chestiuni care slăbesc America și parcă nu prea ne vine să ne imaginăm ce ar putea să însemne așa ceva. Damon Wilson este vicepreședintele Atlantic Council și ne ajută astăzi să înțelegem dincolo de alegerea viitorului președinte al SUA. Institutul Aspen România a fost alături de noi pentru acest interviu. Sunt Cristina Cileacu. Începe Pașaport Diplomatic. Damon Wilson, Vice President of the Atlantic Council think tank, welcome to Diplomatic Passport Program.
It's my pleasure to be with you. I wish I were with you in Bucharest, but thank you for having me on the show, Cristina.
Economia Statelor Unite nu are o perioadă prea bună și, cel mai probabil, efectul acestui lucru se va rostogoli și dincolo de granițele americane. SUA au trecut prin multe experiențe sub conducerea lui Donald Trump, iar promisiunea lui cea mai cunoscută, să facă America mare din nou, nu prea a fost îndeplinită. Eforturile actualei administrații au fost complicate și de pandemia de COVID-19, de care președintele Trump s-a ocupat fără să ia prea mult în serios pe experți.
We are broadcasting this program 3 days before the American elections, and looks like it's going to be for the first time when we are not going to have the result in the same day. What shall we expect? How will it be?
Well, look, there's been a lot of concern and uncertainty and speculation about this election, in part caused by some of the political rhetoric. But let's remember that the United States is a long-functioning democracy. We do know how to run elections, and we do have a due process. So, yes, there are lots of court cases and hearings and challenges and things like that. But that's how our system works. It's called rule of law and due process. And so I'm confident that this election will play out in a way that just needs us to have a little bit of a deep breath and let the ballots be counted and let the results come in. Now, Christina, I do think that there's a chance that we may still know election night. For example, if you see Arizona, Florida, Georgia go to Joe Biden, that pretty much eliminates Donald Trump's pathway to victory. However, if that night, if you see Donald Trump solidify some of the states that he really needs to hold on to, then this could go into some uncertainty for the days after.
Well, the U.S. economy looks pretty weak right now, and the question is, does a weaker economy, does a weaker America means that its role in the world is going to be also weaker?
Look, I think this election is very much about America's role in the world. I think there's been a big, healthy debate in our country recognizing that what led to President Trump's victory were some of the grievances of an electorate, of parts of our population that were left behind as the United States forged ahead in globalization. And I think what we're seeing right now is that there's an understanding coming out of this election, a real commitment to how we fix ourselves at home, and really that means to how we make the investments in the sources of American strength, whether that is the power of our example, of how we actually make our government and democracy work, whether it's the investments we make in infrastructure, in technology, which will be high on the agenda, that will make the United States to be able to be more competitive in a global environment. And so, yes, you will see a sense of how do we actually address some of our issues domestically, but that is what will position the United States to be competitive internationally. And we're grappling with a new model of U.S. leadership and engagement in the world, and I predict that's what you're going to see after this election. We can talk about that.
Statele Unite s-au retras din mai multe tratate și organizații internaționale la care aderase. Opțiunea a fost de fiecare dată a președintelui Trump, care, mai ales în politica externă, a avut abordări din cele mai neobișnuite, iar aceste alegeri au afectat mai mult decât orice credibilitatea superputerii America.
How would you describe these 4 years of foreign affairs under Donald Trump?
4 years of foreign affairs under Donald Trump has been disruptive. This has been a U.S. president who was a populist against all the conventional norms. who was not a product of a lot of the things that have been developed over the years, who is skeptical to some of the fundamentals of America's national strategic assets, whether it's been our national security apparatus and the intelligence community, or our alliances or trade deals. Now, to some extent, there was a healthy process of challenging assumptions. If you think about how we have a relationship, what should be the terms of our relationship with China? How should we think about a United States that actually looks to its partners and its allies to do more? Those are not wrong instincts. However, under President Trump, they came with perhaps a degree of skepticism towards some of our allies, with some boorish language that undermined, I think, the premise of respect that we have with a lot of our allies. And so you've got to recognize that there's some things that are constant. What we've seen over the past 4 years is the United States being less committed in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That would continue. A United States that has actually helped broker normalization between Israel and Arab states. That will continue.
But not with Palestinians, what was actually the main problem in the Middle East.
Well, I think certainly the Palestinian issue is first and foremost a major issue. But I think recognizing the limitations, that there was no pathway there, you've seen some real progress on some of these issues that any Biden administration would continue. You've also seen bipartisan consensus on things like China and the threat, the challenge that it represents, Russia and the challenge as it represents in Congress. And the U.S. Build Act was passed with overwhelming bipartisan support to launch the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, which provides us a fundamental new tool to compete effectively in the world by harnessing private sector capital in a way that the Chinese don't. So some of those things would continue, but obviously the tone, the approach, the worldviews are very different between the candidates.
Since you did mention the disruptions that come up in the relationship of the United States with some countries in the world, let's make two scenarios, since we are before the election, so we still don't know exactly who is going to be the next president. How will the next 4 years will look from this point of view?
I think it depends very much on the scenario. To be honest, I think there's a heck of a lot of work to be done here in the United States to put our house in order, to make our democracy work, to demonstrate that we can govern, to get our economy back on its footing, and to deal with this pandemic. I think those are first order priorities. But it's very clear if you listen to the Biden team that they can walk and chew gum. They plan to come out of the gates, if they have the opportunity, strong with both a domestic plan, which could be really empowered if the Democrats end up taking the Senate, which it looks increasingly likely that they would, but also that they would tag this with a very intentional international strategy that would do, I think, really these basic premise: invest in the sources of American strength at home so we can compete more effectively globally first. Second, reinvigorate our alliances. Third, rejoin and revitalize international institutions from the Paris Climate Accords to WHO. And finally, to put democracy and human rights at the front of an agenda of international justice as well. And I think you would see that very clearly articulated, a gathering, a summit of democracies early in the Biden administration. The Trump team, ironically, has been less prescriptive of what President Trump would do in a second term. But I think you can imagine that the president would feel emboldened, empowered, if he was to have yet another come-from-behind victory, and that would perhaps encourage his instincts on how to navigate in foreign affairs rather than relying on the experts.
China a ales să renunțe la discreție și este tot mai activă în lume. Atitudinea tot mai fermă pe care ne-o arată de ceva vreme este: ce nu pot americanii, putem noi. Iar filozofia pe care președintele Xi Jinping o promovează în discursurile sale vorbește despre întreaga lume ca o singură comunitate. Întrebarea este: cine va fi liderul acestei comunități?
Since there is this competition which looks very much increasing, China has this habit of only working for the very long time, not just long time, very long time. So what are we watching right now?
Look, we're watching a China that under President Xi has become increasingly not just a function of the Communist Chinese Party, but really of a dictatorship under President Xi as he has consolidated his control for life. I think over time that's really detrimental because the Chinese used to have a way of at least transferring power that had some degree of predictability and stability, and I think Xi has broken that. But what you see is that they've ended this chapter of hide and bide their power, and they're coming out on the world stage. They're coming out on the world stage in a way that's a little bit ironic to try to show themselves in contrast to the United States, showing that they're coming out of this pandemic, which began in China, that they can recover first economically. And I think you're seeing increasing economic muscle flexing through Belt and Road, through some investments, in a way that's anathema to how American and private investors operate. And that is the entry point for following through with political influence. So this is issue number one. It really is going to be issue number one over the coming century of how China finds its role in the world, where there's a real potential for hotspots in Taiwan and the South China Sea and Hong Kong. Does it see an opportunity with the United States distracted at the home to act? Or does the United States have a chance to get its act together and to restore a sense of working in common cause with our allies and our partners in Asia and Europe to help have a more common strategy of how to manage to both cooperate in some respects on issues like climate, but also to compete far more effectively to deter Chinese military interests. But we need to do that with our friends and allies in Europe and Asia.
President Putin had a very recent declaration actually saying that in his view Beijing and Germany are going to be the next superpowers, and that if Washington doesn't want to work with Moscow in order to, to balance this situation, then he will switch towards those two mentioned before. What's your take on this declaration?
Well, I wish the Russians, Mr. Putin, all the good luck he can have in his negotiations with Mr. Xi and Beijing. That clearly is a lopsided partnership, and we've seen in Russian Sino deals that the Chinese have really gotten the best of the Russians in negotiations on things like gas and other issues. So good luck, Mr. Putin, if that's where he wants to find his bedfellows. But look, I think long term, I think most Russians understand that it's not the United States or Germany that's a cause of concern. It's really China on its border in Siberia, the Chinese populations that could really begin to shift and have a huge impact in Russia's Far East. Over the long term, historically, you could imagine Russia, Europe, and the United States having far more common interests in dealing with China. But unfortunately, that's not where Mr. Putin is today. That's going to await for a more democratic Russia. On the Germany side, I think you see this as a clever way for Mr. Putin to continue to support divide and conquer. It's not about the EU, it's about Germany. And I think you'll see that instinct of wanting to peel off and divide Europeans to deal with them one by one. And I think the Germans are smart enough to work with their European partners collectively towards Russia. But what's most important is that the United States, after this election, sit down with our European friends and allies and with our Asian friends and allies, and that we deal the free world, the democratic free world that we represent, our way of life, that we understand the challenge that is coming from the model of authoritarian, state-led, corrupt capitalism, different variants from Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi, but those are really the challenges to our societies that we have to work together to have a common strategy against.
Statele Unite au fost mereu atente la dezvoltarea statelor europene din fostul bloc comunist, dar administrația Trump a adus o componentă practică acestei relații. Statele Unite sunt hotărâte să investească mai mult în regiune pentru ca zona să fie mai aproape de nivelul de creștere vest-european.
Under the Trump administration, we can saw as Eastern European that there is an increased interest for this region. In the same time, we see that the relationship with the Western countries in EU is getting a bit colder, let's say. Why is this interest so big under this administration?
Well, look, there is a bipartisan consensus in the United States that we need to step up our engagement and our commitment to Central and Eastern Europe, our NATO allies, on the eastern flank, because if you're sitting there in Romania looking across the Black Sea, the most significant change in the security situation has been because of the Russian positioning of forces on Crimea and in the Black Sea. This is not good for our allies, whether you're in the Baltic states or in Bulgaria, Romania. And so the Trump administration, with a lot of bipartisan support in Congress, has helped step up and continued the American investment in our strategic partnerships with Romania, in our presence of our forces on the eastern flank, and our investment in the missile defense system in Romania that has been a consistent presence of American policy. Now, I would argue that to be most effective, you don't do this by picking Eastern Europe and Central Europe over Western Europe. That's the Russian strategy to divide and conquer. That American strategy could be most effective when we have an extraordinarily strong relationship with Romania, Poland, the Baltic states, in the context of the NATO alliance and in the context of a strong U.S.-EU partnership. And I think that's the recalibration that we need to see in American strategy and policy, so that we maximize the strategic deterrent that we get from having strong presence in the East, and that's by being unified across our alliance as we face off with Russian intimidation.
Relația dintre Statele Unite și Turcia este una foarte complicată, iar cea dintre Donald Trump și Recep Tayyip Erdogan nu este nici ea prea clară. Oricum ar fi, abordarea pe care Statele Unite au ales-o ca răspuns la acțiunile provocatoare pe care turcii le tot pun în practică în ultimii ani a fost una destul de discretă, dar efectele au apărut chiar și așa.
Since you mentioned the Black Sea, there is also an actor that is causing a lot of trouble, maybe not yet in the Black Sea, but all in the region. I'm talking, of course, about another ally as well, Turkey. And America was, let's say, rather discreet in taking a position over Turkey. Why do you think this administration chose this way of replying to Turkey so far?
Look, this relationship is very complicated, and I think we all share a common interest in how we keep Turkey in the strategic West, and how we keep Turkey as a member of the NATO alliance over the long term, and that we understand that Turkey has a future and has a population that is more diverse sometimes than we feel when we just listen to the words of the leadership. That said, there are no doubt some systemic challenges here. And I think you also see President Trump, yes, in a sometimes interesting way, has maintained a active dialogue with President Erdogan. But you've also seen a United States on a bipartisan basis that has hedged a bit by building a stronger relationship with Greece. If you look at American forces in Suda Bay and our drones and operating from the Greek mainland, we have a stronger security presence and a stronger economic and political relationship with Greece than we've had perhaps ever. The same applies to the Republic of Cyprus. And we've had an East Med strategy that has looked to bolster the democracies in that region. Now, we want to be an arbiter to help manage the disputes between NATO allies. And so this is a difficult one. And I think I predict in the next administration that this will only get more complicated and that we will have some flare-ups. The trick for us is, can we navigate some of these fundamental differences while understanding that the long-term strategic interests are for us to figure out how we have a vested interest, whether you're in Bucharest or Athens, for Turkey to be in the strategic West in a face-off we feel with authoritarians looking further north and east.
Romania and United States show the interest for each other in all the possible ways. That's a very clear partnership, and defense is the strong point of our relation. Do you think we can develop other strong points of this relationship?
Definitely. I think our relationship with Romania is extraordinary. I think you very well know that Romanian politics are sometimes as turbulent as we see here in American politics. There can be polarization, division, lots of changes in personalities and governments. We've seen that over the years in Romania. And yet, we see such a strong alliance. Our strategic partnership is deep and enduring. It is supported across political parties in Romania. It is supported on a deep bipartisan basis in the United States, and that's a great thing. As an American analyst, I have to say I am just so proud that we have Romania as a NATO ally. I've seen the depths of our cooperation on intelligence and defense. We have real things happening on the ground with the Aegis Ashore system, the access to some of the airfield, a strong strategic and defense cooperation where we need to be more in tune with you on how to actually manage security in the Black Sea. But we absolutely have to continue to build out the political pillar of the relationship and keep those political ties very tight and close in consultations. I want to see Romanian presidents and prime ministers in Washington regularly and American top officials in Bucharest regularly. But the area for greatest growth will be economics and energy. Romania needs to do a little bit of work to get its act in order to unlock the energy potential that it has, particularly with Black Sea offshore assets. That could be a major area of growth and cooperation and a common energy security strategy.
Damon, thank you so much for this interview, and looking forward to having a second one maybe in Bucharest or in Washington.
I'm eager to be there in Bucharest or on the Black Sea somewhere with you, and let's make that a date.
Atât pentru astăzi, dar rămânem în continuare online pe pagina de Facebook a emisiunii și pe contul nostru de Twitter. Revenim cu subiecte noi din lumea diplomației și a politicii externe vinerea viitoare de la 11:30 și în reluare sâmbătă de la 22:30. La revedere!